Hello? Can people in the back hear me? Thumbs up. Perfect, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today on a Friday evening. My name is Summer, and I'm a senior studying economics and education. I'm currently serving as the president of Brown's Undergraduate Council of Students. So our work as the Student Council primarily focuses on working closely with the administration and the student body to foster an inclusive and supportive environment for students of all family backgrounds. Therefore, I'm so excited to welcome you all today on campus and to kick off the family weekend. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. This is the first semester in over a year that we are reunited here on campus fully in person, which makes this weekend even more special. Brown has been a place. Thank you. It is a really special weekend. Brown has been a place that's empowered me to embrace and tackle difficult challenges, a place where I met some of the kindest and smartest people, and most importantly, a vibrant and warm community that I'm so grateful to call home. I'm so excited that you will have the opportunity to explore and experience a little bit of this amazing community this weekend. I remember when I first left home and came to college, I promised my parents that I would call them every day. Well, as you know, that frequency definitely fluctuated quite dramatically over the past few years, but I'm forever grateful for all their love and support. I would not be here without them. So families, thank you so much for showing up. It really means a lot to us. Thanks. And with that, I will turn over the mic to President Paxson, who is the president of Brown University, a distinguished economist who I've had the pleasure of working with through student government and learning from through the economics department. Families, thank you so much again for coming here. Have a phenomenal weekend, and please join me in welcoming President Paxson.
Thank you, Summer, and it really is great to work with the students who are involved in student government. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Family Weekend. I know this is an audience of families and students, and it's just great to see all of you here in person. Some people are joining us virtually. You're welcome too, and we hope to see you at some point before too long. So in just a few moments, I'm going to have the privilege of welcoming our Family Weekend keynote speaker, Soledad O'Brien. But before I do, I'd just like to say a few very brief words of welcome for this weekend and say a little bit, and this is really more addressed to the families in the audience and the students. The students, you can tell your families whether I'm saying the right things. What it's like to be a student at Brown. And I think it's a tremendous time here. First, I just want to encourage you, though, before I go on, to take advantage of just some amazing events that are happening this weekend. We have a lot of faculty forums on climate change, health policy, collaborative learning. There is a fantastic walking tour that's led by the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice that explores the history and legacy of slavery related to Brown. There are opportunities to catch up on an a cappella concert, something we didn't have any of last year, so it's great to have them back. Classic Ivy League football matchup pitting Bears against Tigers. That's Brown versus Princeton tomorrow afternoon. I will be there. I am expecting a Brown victory. And I hope you'll join us downtown tomorrow night for Water Fire, which is this amazing tradition now in Providence that was started by a Brown alum. So it's just an amazing experience if you haven't had a chance to go. Now, the most important part of the weekend, though, is for the parents, those of you in the audience who are family members, to see firsthand what life is like for your for your child, your student at Brown. And you know, the past year and a half has taught us that we can do a lot virtually, we can, but it also displayed just how much we value the relationships and collaboration that develops in person. And I am just personally so grateful to have our community fully reunited this year. Now, every college student is different. I know there's a lot of variety even in this tent. And there's a lot of variation in how they communicate with their families. We've already heard Summer talking about calling her family various points during the course of her time here. Some of you may be getting real-time downloads every day. Others, and this was my experience when I had a student at Brown, are only able to coax out tiny bits of information, mostly by text. And it goes something like this. Question, how are your classes? Answer a few minutes later, great. Question, are you getting along with your roommate? Answer hours later, yep. Question, are you getting enough sleep? No response, ever. So usually the families of first-year students are most heavily represented during family weekend, but this year's a little bit different. And I think the reason why we have such a great turnout is that a lot of families of second-year students decided to come because they didn't have the opportunity last year. And even parents of juniors and seniors who are just missing being on campus have come back. So welcome to all of you, regardless of what year your students are at Brown. And it's great to see all of you here. I hope, and here I am, and I know there's students in the audience too, but I want to really focus my comments to the parents. There's some things that I hope you see, 3 things that I hope you see during this weekend. And one, and maybe the most important, is that your students, your children feel grounded and comfortable, that they're making lifelong friends, they're finding their places within the Brown ecosystem. We've had so much disruption over the last year and a half, I think it's especially important now, that all students feel a sense of ownership in Brown, no matter what their path was to get here. Brown is their university. They have a stake not only in their own intellectual and social development, but in the success of everybody in this community, and we really are a community. This idea of ownership, and I think Summer actually used the word empowerment, which I love, it is one of the central pieces that unleashes the magic of student-centered learning that we work so hard to create here at Brown University. And you know, we have these amazing, intellectually curious and creative and just really good-hearted students. We admit them, they come here, they work together in ways that help everybody learn, everybody aspire to things that are higher than themselves, and it's wonderful to see. I'm constantly astonished by the goodness of this community, and it starts with our students, your children, joining with faculty and administrators to create the caring and collaborative environment that we want. So that's number one. The second thing is I hope you see your children are enrolled in courses that are interesting and challenging and thought-provoking and provide the intellectual engagement that's a hallmark of a Brown education. So there are some lingering myths out there. I hope they're false. For example, that our open curriculum gets students off the hook from having to take hard classes. You're likely hearing something quite different. And in fact, during the pandemic, when we had more students studying from home and we had parents sort of looking over their shoulders and seeing the courses and seeing what they were doing and seeing how much they were studying, for the first time ever, I had parents writing to me saying that we were giving their children too much work, right? Never had happened before. So that was kind of eye-opening. But the fact is, Brown students are really serious about their academics, and the open curriculum does lead to academic rigor. It lends itself to it. And the magic, I think, is that when students take the courses that they want to take, that they chose, that they were empowered to choose, they take their learning much more seriously, they're more engaged, and this actually turns around and impacts the quality of teaching that they get in the classroom. So you get this sort of virtuous cycle where the students are where they want to be and the faculty are teaching students who want to be there, and so they're happy and they teach better. And that's part of the secret success of Brown University. It doesn't get much better than that. So the last thing I just want to say is I hope you see that as life returns to normal, if it ever gets quite back to where it was, that your children are developing a cadence of academics and extracurriculars and social life and, yes, sleep that works for them. And, you know, my experience is that striking this balance, and I'm really talking mainly to the parents of first-year students, this can be a transition that can be hard. And you may have students who are just eager, and it's true of so many Brown students, they just want to leap into everything. And I think this is especially true now coming out of the pandemic when people felt really buttoned down for the last year and a half. And this is where families, I think, can be really important by, you know, working with your students, your children, to help them, you know, maybe a little nudging, a little sense of perspective that they don't have to do everything at once, that there is time. Their health and wellness is important and it requires balance, and you can help them achieve that balance. You know, the last few years have really tested us, and they've tested us in multiple ways. Not only a pandemic, but we've been grappling with racism and immigration policy and free speech and political and economic polarization. All of this has become very contentious on American campuses. But I think what we see is that during these times of tension, that's when the resilience and kindness and caring of our communities really come out. So, you know, I stand really proud of what we do at Brown every day. The story is the same, even as times change. We have students and faculty who are learning to advance knowledge together in a spirit of free inquiry and in a spirit of joy. And that's really what we want to see. So, let me introduce our keynote speaker. This is, as I said, an undeniably complicated time, and, you know, all of the things that are going on. And in highly polarized and complex time, we look to journalists, we look to people in the media to report on issues in ways that enlighten us and help us understand the complexities around us. Soledad O'Brien has spent her career doing just that. So she is an award-winning documentarian, journalist, speaker, author who founded Soledad O'Brien Productions, which is a multi-platform media production company dedicated to telling really empowering and authentic stories on a range of social issues. And she is, as you can see from here, the proud parent of a Brown student. So over the course, who's sitting in the front row, sorry, I shouldn't embarrass you. Soledad has reported and produced hundreds of important stories and documentaries on topics including youth incarceration, police brutality, veterans with PTSD, the opioid epidemic, and she has been just steadfast in her commitment to calling out wrongdoing in government, as well as holding media organizations accountable for the ways in which news coverage is presented. And I hope we can talk about a lot of this in the Q&A. Over the years, she's garnered so many awards, 3 Emmys, 2 Peabodys, 3 Gracie Awards, the Alfred I. DuPont Award, and on top of all that, she cares deeply about higher education. In the wake of Hurricane Katrina, Soledad and her husband created the Powerful Foundation, I hope I got that right, to help young women get to and through college. So on behalf of everybody at Brown, we're thrilled that you're here, and please join me in welcoming Soledad O'Brien. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here this evening. Thank you to President Paxton Summer. Thank you for your remarks. Families, moms and dads, and the students who are here, shout out to the sophomore parents who missed it last year. Representing this year, excellent. I'm gonna start by admitting a very terrible thing. I did not go to Brown. Sorry, but I might be excused for that affront because, as the president mentioned, my daughter, Cecilia, is sitting in the front row. She is a sophomore. When I was in college 2 zillion years ago, starting new seemed, rough, a new environment, new people, new challenges. And I think, like a lot of young students, I missed my family, I missed my friends, and I think my family missed me as well. But there was an electricity in the air, excitement over everything new, and even my parents were, I hesitate to say, excited to see me go. Today, in many ways, things are the same, but also different, because of course, Brown students faced a uniquely challenging experience in this past year and a half. And I'm here to tell you that it's going to get better, much better, because sometimes out of real struggle, things that are good can come. So let's take a moment to start with a look back at what didn't work very well last year. There was a survey of about 2,000 college students across 108 institutions, and nearly half who were interviewed rated the value of their education as fair or poor. More than half, 52%, said they learned less than they had compared to pre-COVID years. And 1 in 5 recalled receiving nudging reminders from their college about both course activity and college business deadlines, so only 1 in 5 of those. But because I'm making this speech at Brown University, this institution has doubled down on putting in place structures to both keep students safe and also get them simultaneously the absolutely best education possible. They have and have had an opportunity to show that Brown students facing adversity can grow, and those students have. And they've had to acquire more strength and compassion and humanity and generosity and, yes, wisdom. And as they embark on this new term, it's worth asking what they can do to make this year stand out, what they can do to help create that electricity in the air that will make this experience special and help and honor those around them who are working hard as well. So first, if you look back on where they came from, because it goes well beyond the gates of this school, most of the students that we're talking about right now were born just a few years before the 9/11 attacks. They were just about 10 years old when a recession hit. There was climate change and school shootings to deal with, political division, war, and very significantly, I think, the ongoing harm that racism has done in our society. Then came COVID, a tragedy that I think will define this generation, a historic, punishing, for some, cruel global pandemic. Who could have foreseen a total shutdown of the country, millions of people becoming seriously ill, hundreds of thousands who died, an economy wrecked, entire industries healed? Never would we have envisioned sitting in front of our computers day after day after day to go to school or go to work, or donning a mask, staying indoors, isolating from friends. Some of us lost people. Some of us lost jobs or homes or opportunities. And yet, here we all are. But another thing I think these circumstances have done is to help us gather strengths, because we're not just the people who endured hardship. We're the people who worked with the people around us as citizens, as members of a community, as students, faculty, and administration, and, yes, parents, and all those who work at Brown to hunker down and make things happen, even during the summer, as my daughter likes to remind me, with only 3 weeks off. Yes. We sacrifice to stop the spread of a deadly virus, wore masks, recognize that there are people working here who were taking great risks to keep things running. And we thank them, at least I hope we all did. And if we didn't, start doing it now. Here are some facts that I think shed light on how the students of this time faced the pandemic and made some really substantial accomplishments. 50% of young people between the ages of 18 and 29 voted in the 2020 presidential election. That's an 11-point increase from 2016, and likely one of the highest rates of youth electoral participation since the voting age was lowered to the age of 18. Countless young people across the United States propelled protests following the killing of George Floyd in the spring. They organized marches and vigils and sit-ins and, yes, occupations of government property, and they did so at great personal risk, considering the brutality of some of the responses and, of course, the risk of the COVID pandemic. Who is the face of the public fight now to recognize climate change and act? From Jakarta to New York City, it's young people who are doing it, who are marching in the streets and demanding actual action. Youth activism, both online and offline, has been on the rise now for years, according to a 2018 poll from Tufts University Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement. But in the years since the murder of George Floyd, youth-led movements often powered some of the most viral Black Lives Matter protests. 45% of young people in a recent poll said they took concrete action for racial justice in 2020. And 29% said they participated in a march or a demonstration. Those are remarkable figures. Today's students made online work for them rather than lamenting its shortcomings, or maybe they both lamented the shortcomings a lot and also made online work for them. 95% of college students said their professors were addressing their personal needs while allowing for understanding in completing coursework. Nearly the same percentage said that their instructors pivoted well to be able to teach and switch to remote modes. 85% said that their online courses felt like a community. 84% said that learning environments that were remote could be effective. And 70% said they would consider taking more virtual classes in the future. The young people, and maybe not so young people here, who got through this time, well, those people are now strong, and they're full of resilience. And they are people now who think globally and they act locally, and the person they are now should value ever more than before why education is precious, why a community that's functional and kind and unified is precious. We all, as members of a community, carry an obligation to participate in its well-being. So I thought I'd do a short list of things that I would advise for Brown students, but hey, anybody, parents, educators, anybody in this mix is welcome to listen. I think we have learned over the past tumultuous 18 months that we have to work as a group, not as a lone wolf in the world. This year is going to be a group effort, and we're going to need to work together to help keep each other safe. We actually are responsible for the other people around us. Despite the obstacles, get up every day and keep pushing forward. Be generous. I hope you've learned one thing during this challenging time that will propel you through this upcoming year. This life is not only about what this amazing country offers or gives to you or can make possible. It's really about what you do with that gift. Do something. These times, I think, call upon all of us to be people of action. We need to vote. Sometimes we need to organize. We need to speak up when we're presented with injustice. Our students need to honor what it took to get here by continuing to study and succeed and learn from people and books and life about what it means to be a good citizen. And parents, we need to model that day in and day out. And think positively. We need to step up and don't be cynical. I think in college students sometimes it feels like it's easy to be cynical. But I think that's kind of lazy, actually. Don't be the voice in the room that frames the world as a list of can'ts. Instead, convince yourself that everything will work out if we can just figure out how to do it. We've been robbed of opportunities, and we will always have this chance to make these past 2 years mean something. We can do something to make things better. Always. We can come up with a bright idea or pitch in to help somebody else's bright idea, someone else who's leading the charge. We can work hard and muster those around us to do something. Don't ever think you've lost just because you didn't get your way. Find a way to accomplish what you can and come back and tackle the rest. If nothing else, this past year has taught us that the best way out of a hole is to climb upward. And finally, help each other. I mean, that really has been the takeaway from the last 18 months. We have to help each other. We have seen a year of very real problems with solutions that sometimes feel very elusive, but they're there. Not just events like this, hopefully the pandemic subsiding or the war ending in Afghanistan or recession lifting, but also all those things that led up to them. We have seen some of the greatest challenges in our nation's history and also seen some of the greatest mobilizations to try to solve those challenges. Your role in some of this might have been passive, but it doesn't always have to be. Brown offers students a wealth of opportunities to be involved, and above all, to learn, so that students carry with assets that can propel success and help those around you. Life offers that same opportunities to parents, to educators, to all of us. Someone has given our students this amazing opportunity to learn and to grow, to achieve. Encourage them to make the most of it, to reach out to mentors and teachers, to offer help, to appreciate the people around them who are helping them, whether they're mopping floors or serving food or quoting from great literature. Enjoy this time. Vaccinations and good public health measures might get us back to what we think of as normal, but I think none of us really, after the last year and a half, are exactly the same people we were. That's an opportunity. Let's make sure that the new us is an even better us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and it's great to see so many people here. So this is what we're going to do. I have some questions. We'll start out a discussion, and then we'll open it for audience Q&A. And I think there are microphones planted around the audience up front, so you can come up and do that when we get closer. But let me just start with a little bit on change in the world. And we like to tell our students that the open curriculum is the best way to prepare students for a world that's inevitably going to change in unexpected ways during the course of their lifetime. And the world of media, your world, is one that has changed. I mean, it's a case in point. It's changed dramatically. And I guess one question is, when I looked at your career, I thought, wow, you're really like navigating and changing in a very agile way. What do you agree with that? And what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for students to really think about what their futures are going to be. And certainly journalism has changed. I've been in journalism for 32 years now. So it's completely, I mean, when I started working in local news, the station where I worked, WBZ TV in Boston, had one live, all right, Boston.
You have some Boston people.
Had one microwave truck, and only certain people were allowed to go live. And, you know, and it was like a rarity. And now I've anchored 11-hour shows live remote from wherever. So just the technology alone has changed. But I think there was always an opportunity to think of the work that you're doing as sort of this resume of the skills that you're gathering for whatever you want to go do next. I continue to anchor shows, but really at the end of the day, I run a production company. I tell stories. I tell other people's stories. I try to find people to tell their own stories. And I think there's so many opportunities to not think of what you're doing as, I studied this and I got a job doing this, but I have these skills. And how can I be challenged to gain more skills? And how can I think about what I want to achieve next? And there's so many opportunities in work. So yeah, journalism is changing. There's a lot of things I really struggle with in journalism. The idea of objectivity, I think we're having lots of conversations about that today. Elevating things that are clearly not true, or misinformation or disinformation. There's lots of debates about that. But I think the skills that you learn and have as a journalist can translate in so many other areas, and that's the thing that's given me a lot of joy as I continue to take on other jobs.
Right. So I was going to ask you about objectivity, and you know, I think we've seen during the past year and a half, we look to the media to give us what we hope is objective advice that's grounded in fact. At least that's what I think most of us want. But it's pretty confusing, and a lot of different voices out there. So I guess the question is, do you think that this kind of quest for the objective media is it hopeless? Is it worth it? And then I guess part two is what is it, if it's not possible, what does it mean for democracy and how we continue to stay together as a community?
For the show that we do, which is called Matter of Fact, which looks at public policy, we think of it more as we have an audience and our job is to serve them by giving them accurate information. because I think this idea of, what exactly is somebody's objective truth, there's been failures long before just the last few years of that. And I'll give you an example that I'm horrified to give you, but I will give it to you. So one of the things we used to do when I was a new reporter was to kind of work out a deal with the local police. We needed to, they would do a perp walk, right? They would take somebody who they had arrested and they would let us know when they were gonna walk them around the building. That was very helpful if you were a new reporter, right? Because you needed about 11 seconds to get the top of your, John Michael Smith was arrested today, right? It gives you the chunk of your piece to cover. That person has already been processed, they're indoors. So you're working really in cahoots with the police department to, one, show off this arrest that they've done, but also, you might never cover that story again. We never would go back necessarily and tell the story of what happened to this person. The help for me was that I got to cover the first 11 seconds of my piece. I helped the police department show that they had an arrest, but what were we actually doing? And it really took me a couple of years before we began to realize this is insane, that's absolutely inappropriate to be working in that way, especially since we are most likely not ever going to go back and talk about that. Were they cleared? Was it a mistake? Was it mistaken identity? We never followed up. And so I think people now have many more questions about the way in which journalism is done, because I think we have to challenge ourselves to make sure what we're doing is serving the audience. And having someone walked around is not a service to the audience. Giving context to stories is service to the audience. What is objectivity exactly? Is it my point of view? There are certainly facts that are provable, but there are points of view and context that can be added. I prefer in journalists to have people be very transparent about where they're coming from and what they've seen. I also think we have an effort now to have both sides, which I find sometimes very strange. So for example, when I do a story on NASA, I don't say, and now we've got Bill Smith, he's with the Flat Earth Society. Bill, you just heard about what they're doing in space, I guess we have to hear. It doesn't work like that. And yet many stories are actually structured in a way that, this person says this and this person says that. We need to, hear from both sides. I think that is relatively new and extremely problematic. So what we always do is go back to, what is the best way to serve our audience? How do we explain something that's complicated and complex? How do we make sure they can understand what's at stake in the debate and make sure they understand at least what sides are saying, but we absolutely, positively do not want to ever elevate misinformation and disinformation.
Right. And before we walked down here, you were telling me about some recent work you're doing where you really focused on getting real stories from real people. Could you just say a little bit about that? I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, we've had tremendous opportunity, I think. It's what I like about documentary, is that you really get to hand the mic to people. And what you find, a lot of cable news is very based on division. Right? We have this person on this side, and for the next 5 minutes, he's gonna yell at this person on this side. And no one sort of helps you understand the issue. But you actually find, when you move away from elected officials and you sort of talk to people. I'll give you an example. A young man we profiled works full-time in San Diego, but can't afford housing. Just cannot afford housing in San Diego. San Diego's become a very expensive city. So he's not Latino. He commutes from Mexico into his job in San Diego every day, right? So it's a way to look at the housing crisis without two people screaming at each other, but to understand what is actually happening to individuals. Or somebody who, for example, is dealing with the cost of insulin. Why is insulin so expensive? How do people pay for it? And really, again, I think you don't have to have a discussion about their politics, which is often fraught with division. It can just be a I often don't even know anybody's politics. I just want to understand the issue around, for example, the high price of insulin and how families are dealing with it. So we have found in documentary and reporting generally that when you actually give the mic to people, to individuals, the stories you hear are much more unifying in a way. Most people aren't like screaming over the fence at their neighbor every day. Some people are, but most are not. They're actually trying to solve a problem in their lives. And I think that we have found by telling those stories, it's much more informative and helpful.
Yeah, and less divisive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you were to give advice to a Brown student who came to you and said, you know, I'm thinking of a career
if I only had
in
a Brown
media."
student who listened to my advice,
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonder what that would be like.
Yeah, exactly. But somebody who was thinking of a career in media or journalism, or they're coming and asking their parents, so maybe you can tell them what advice to give. What advice would you give? What's the best path in, or are there multiple paths in?
I was pre-med when I was in college. And I think one of the greatest things was learning what I didn't want to do. I actually took organic chemistry with my sister, who's now a surgeon, and worked out for one of us. But really, and we were taking a class together, and she said, you know, you're just not passionate about it. And it was like a light went off. Like, she was absolutely right. I was good at memorizing things and kind of like, well, I could spew them out on a test, but I wasn't passionate. And so I would say, use your time at Brown to figure out really what you're passionate about. What interests you really? So take the time to talk to people and learn from people and volunteer for things and try out learning like, wow, I never ever want to be a lawyer is a really good thing to learn over a summer if that's something that you've been considering and you discover like it's not for you. That's very good. Then I would also say, make sure you have, you use an opportunity to be at a university that has so many different kinds of students to really get to know people who aren't like you, you know? Just really get to meet people who are nothing like you so that you can grow from this experience. It's very comforting to stay in your lane and find people who are just like you, but really to step out, I think, is a really important part of college. Write. If you're gonna be a journalist, write all the time. Also, your iPhone is, we shot the show that I do for HBO Real Sports, we shot it on 3 iPhones in my bedroom, during the pandemic. So that is a TV quality phone. If you have any interest in doing a TV show, you should be doing a TV show every night. Literally come up with a concept, and even if it's 4 minutes long, if that's something you're thinking about, every single day, do a report. The first 100 will be terrible, so you can just delete them. You might only have your mom, your dad, and like 2 cousins watching and critiquing you, but just the doing of it will give you really good experience. And again, the quality, it's high quality, you'll be able to send it off to people. And finally, I would say, you know, being able to pivot, and I think for a lot of students in this pandemic, you've had to pivot, right? You just constantly, you've learned the benefits of having to pivot and turn and have things not go well and turn again. Being able to pivot is a really great skill. Having a plan A and then turning and saying, well, that's not gonna work, and turning to plan B and, okay, that's not so great, and going to plan C are really, really good, important skills. And so, you know, do that consistently, constantly think about what you want to, you know, what's on your resume, what do you want to be working toward, what you want to have in your skill set. I think those are all really important steps if you're thinking about journalism or many other careers.
So I'm going to ask you one more question before we open it up and let some other people come in. But you did an interview in New York Magazine recently where you shared a favorite saying of your mother's. And you said, and I guess your mother used to say, everybody gets the same 24 hours. You just have to figure out how you want to spend yours. And this seems really relevant to college students who are trying to cram 28 hours into 24 hours on a regular basis. So maybe you can talk about how you've internalized that advice. Clearly it meant something to you.
Yeah, my mom was great. She passed away a couple of years ago. She was great at giving advice, she was really helpful. And when she said that, I think there were lots of conversations for women of my generation around, you know, we can have it all. And I love that she would always challenge that with, like, who wants to have it all? Like, what is all anyway? Like, why don't you just want the things that you want? What do you want? You know, okay, you have a chunk of time, write down the 10 things that you would like to accomplish, and then make sure you divide them up in a way that matches your interests. And then you have to go back and actually see if the thing that you're saying is important to you is showing up in your timeline in that way. If you say you really, really care about volunteering, but you look at your time and you haven't spent any time at all volunteering, you either have to change your list or change your schedule. And so I thought that was always really good advice, because I often felt, well, I think I should do this, and I probably should learn how to cook, which I can't cook, and I probably should do this. And, and really, I thought her advice was like, cross some of that stuff off your list. You just don't do it. Just decide it's not important. Now, what is important to you? And so I would end up having a very good list of, here's what I want to accomplish for this year, for next year, for 5 years from now. I removed cooking, as my husband can tell you, he's in the front row here. I have no regrets about it. There's just things that I would offload off of this idea of what I had to get done. And I wanted to start a scholarship for young women who couldn't afford college. So we did that. I wanted to make sure that we had opportunities to travel, so we added that to the list. I do think for students, I'm a list maker, and so I always encourage students to keep lists of, what do you want to accomplish? What do you really want to get out of your school experience? Track it. Think about what you want to do, and be very open with people about the amount of time you have to spend. So again, you have a lot of time here, and you can really be thoughtful in how you spend your time, but really digging into what matters to you the most, I think, is a very good first step.
And learning what matters to you, right? You may not even know at the beginning.
Right.
So, okay, so look, there are people, please come down with questions. I think we have one right here. Thank you.
Is this open?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, President Paxson, Ms. O'Brien, thank you very much. Thanks to both of you, and thanks for both of you trying to improve the society you live in, which is very important. I truly believe that journalists are guardians of democracy and freedom. Thank you for what you do. Like any other profession, there is always a negative also. And I wonder if yellow journalism and sensationalism these days, especially with like breaking news every minute when there is truly not a breaking news, even from serious outlets, has caused people to be desensitized, and especially in the last few years when there was true danger to our democracy. People didn't stand up and pay notice to journalists, and certainly not like Watergate. What do you think about this, and do you think there is a solution to that?
It's a great question, and I think you're right. I think the challenge is really social media. I think what you're seeing now is news organizations are actually competing with social media, which means it has to be sort of over the top, right? You've got to grab people, even if you're saying something that's not necessarily 100% what the story is about. You often will read a headline and like, oh my God, and then you're like, oh, the story is nothing like this. And I think that's been pretty consistent, because now you're not just competing with other outlets, news organizations, you're trying to compete with social media. You're trying to grab those viewers as well. It's very problematic. And also there's this giant pipe. Everybody who is getting any kind of information feels overwhelmed, right, by the constant flow of updated stories. My favorite thing is not just the breaking news, which is on all the time, but also exclusive. But when you look up, like if you're in the gym, everybody has the same person being interviewed, but they all say exclusive. You're like, you can't all have the person exclusively simultaneously. It's not possible. So, but it's a way to like sell and sell and sell. And I think you're right. What you end up doing is just exhausting your audience. You really just end up almost cannibalizing your audience. When we were covering the Newtown school shooting years ago, the very first week, the people in Newtown really appreciated us because we were pushing officials for lots of updates and information, and it really felt like the journalism we were doing was very important. Second week, there was a tiny little delta in the benefit we were getting from staying on the ground, right? So we had a little higher rating than we had before, so we stayed, even though the story had kind of moved on. Now, people were annoyed with us. They would beep their horns as they were driving by our live people. Third week, we're still there. Right now, everyone just out and out hates you because you're not there because there's reporting to do. You're there because you're just you're trying to eke out this ratings victory or a little bit of a gap in what it was a couple weeks ago. And I think that again it goes back to serving your audience. People realize it. They get it. They're not tricked. They're not fooled. We found in the show that I do that when we removed elected officials from our show, our numbers went up. We started doing things like, so it's about the First Amendment. What is the First Amendment? Let's talk specifically about what happened on January 6th. What is democracy exactly? Everyone talks about the Constitution. What's really in it? The president is sworn into office. What does he swear to? You know, these are all things that people are like, I don't really know, actually. So we thought that this would be a way to educate people, and our ratings went up, right? We actually found that people don't love yelling. They prefer to learn something in their in the media that they're consuming. I don't know, Pete, you can do it sort of on the individual level, but I just don't know that there's a movement toward that. For a while, there was solutions journalism, which I thought was very good, but even that, I think, gets steamrolled by this sense of conflict, at least we know draws an audience to some degree. You can see it in the latest polling around viewers don't even understand what the president has proposed, right? And I would say, if viewers are telling you that they don't understand in the polling, you have failed. That's your job. It's your job. Literally, if you're someone who's supposed to teach, the alphabet, and at the end of the year, no one knows the alphabet, you have failed in your job. So I have done my best to try to call that out, but I don't know how you fix it. What you're seeing is a drop in viewership consistently. And I think that's going to continue until people realize that audiences actually want to be educated and understand what's happening in the world around democracy. We all talk about democracy, but I think for a lot of people, they actually don't understand what goes into democracy, what makes a democracy. It's very frustrating, so I completely share your frustration. Hi.
Thank you. Question over here.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm a very tall woman. You both talked a lot about the effects of last summer in terms of racial relations, and I think Soledad, if I can call you that, I don't know if
Please.
I can.
Yeah.
I watched Black in America when I was younger. It was very cool. So this is a very.
And you're a
cool
grown
moment.
person. You realize when you say, I watched your show when I was younger, and you're a grown woman.
So this is a very cool moment for me. But
Well, thank you.
I kind of want to focus on what your mom said. There are 24 hours in a day, and you just kind of have to, figure out what you want to do with them. I thought that was kind of interesting because I feel like, especially at this university, people of color, people of, lower class, people from, different walks of life can't actually, use all 24 hours the same way that other people could. And I'm thinking back to Black in America, when you did this whole section of it on the dolls and how if you're not familiar, how white children prefer the white dolls and Black children might also. I think I kind of say all of this to say to almost both of you, how in your work do you think you can deal with the fact that there's a lot of work that goes into just being a minority in America, and you don't have all 24 hours to just do work. You also do existing.
So I sit on the board of RAND Corporation, and I was talking to one of my colleagues. They've been working on a study, and their finding is that particularly Black women, but women of color as a whole, during the pandemic have found that they are enjoying being remote because there's less racism that they have to deal with. That's a brutal data point, right? It's actually been beneficial for them because not being in the workplace has kind of been helpful. It speaks volumes about exactly what you're saying, right? Which is this cost of racism that is actually very challenging to people. I mean, we know it when we look at data around Black women and pregnancy, right? When you control for everything, Black women still are 2 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth or have an injury to their infant. And doctors will tell you, it is literally because of systemic racism that is, so there's this burden that's really challenging. So you're right, I never really thought about it as that 24-hour window, but it is. My parents were an interracial couple. So my mom was Black and from Cuba, my dad was white and from Australia. They met in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins University. And their first date they went on, as foreigners, no one would serve them in restaurants because they went to a restaurant together, which was not gonna happen in 1958 in Baltimore. And eventually my mom took my father back to her apartment. She was a great cook of Cuban food. She whipped him up a meal. The whole entire point of her story was, see, Lovey, if you could cook, you could get a man, because... but, you know, nothing about integration, segregation, 1958 America. But I think what she was really, you know, would talk a lot about, like, what it was like. I'd say, well, what was it like in Baltimore in the early 60s? And she'd say people would spit on them as they walked down the street. You know, and I don't think as we tell these stories that you actually, like, calculate, like, the cost of being spit on as you walk down the street, right? Or the cost of what it's like to be the one and only in your class, day after day after day. Or for women in the boardroom, the cost of emotional cost of, you know, raising your hand again, as we did when we were doing our doc series Latino in America at CNN, and we had a long debate about, are Puerto Ricans Americans? The answer is yes, you can Google it, right? Like, but 20 minutes in, I was like, this is insane that we're having this, you know, and it's a pain, but it's also like sucks the life out of you to some degree as well. And so I think one of the things that my mother used to also say was, don't let anybody tell you you're not Black, don't let anybody tell you you're not Latina, right? Like, to some degree, you have an opportunity in college to carve out who you are, and you might just have to snatch back those hours. And you're gonna have to decide, like, this is who I am, this is what I believe, and this is what I want to accomplish here. And, you know, my girlfriend, my best friend, likes to say, you know, don't let anybody steal your joy. Like, and if you, to some degree, that's on you to figure out how to not allow that to happen in your life. It's an added burden, but you're gonna have to do it. And so, you know, I think that is the cost of navigating through life. And the more people around you begin to understand that, you know, those are then people in meetings who are the ones who raise their hands and say, you as the Black woman don't have to answer this question. I can answer that. You know, I understand this issue and I can speak knowledgeably about it, so it doesn't always have to fall on you to do it. I'll tell you one funny story. I did a documentary on a guy named Buster Soaries, one of our Black in America docs. He was the Secretary of State for Governor Christie Todd Whitman, and Black guy, Black pastor. And he said to her at the beginning, listen, as an African-American man, I want you to know that I am here as Secretary of State. I am not here for the Black events. I am the Secretary of State of the state of New Jersey. She's like, I got it. He watched her give her first speech to a Black audience. He's like, okay, so now I'm in charge of all the Black events for your, you know, right? Because that's the cost of moving forward in this world a little bit. But don't let people steal your joy. You decide what you want out of your 24 hours, and you go get them.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Okay, well, I have one more question, and it goes a little bit with what you were saying, but I think on a broader scale. You've talked previously about how you see the pandemic on one hand and racial injustice on the other hand as twin plagues, with the pandemic magnifying inequalities. And we've seen this in healthcare, we've seen it in so many different areas of life. And I guess, you know, I want to pull some optimism out of this moment and say, is there a way that magnifying these pre-existing inequities gives us an opportunity to make some changes that maybe were harder to make before?
It's a little bit playing off of what you talked about.
Yeah.
I believe today, I mean, if you watch any of the George Floyd protests, those are very racially diverse protests, probably the most racially diverse protests around a civil rights issue that I have ever seen. I cannot help but read that as a plus, right? That means that people are beginning to understand that conversations about racial equality involve everybody. They have to involve everybody, that it's not just the Black people who care or the Latinos who care, that it actually has to be everybody. And to me, that gave me tremendous hope. And I think the pandemic really exposing these inequities is something that everybody understands now. You know, people used to talk about the social determinants of public health, and I used to beg people in public, please don't say that. It's the most confusing thing, the social determinants of public health. Like, it really is just how stuff is unfair, and it's all interrelated. I think the pandemic explained to everybody the social determinants of public health, right? All the ways in which, so you have a job, you're an essential worker, you need to go and be exposed, putting yourself at risk, but you're not gonna actually have enough money to be able to protect yourself, et cetera, all these ways in which it's connected. I think the pandemic has allowed people to understand that connection better, and I think more Americans today understand some of these issues around racial inequity than they did before. I truly believe that. I've spent a lot of years covering that. So that in and of itself really makes me feel very optimistic about the next steps.
And you know, I see that at Brown. I see what our students are interested in. I see what our faculty are teaching. So I do sense a change. So I have some optimism coming out of this too.
Good.
So thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.